So going through the paper here and having a look at what you needed to do for the first question, you need to say what these two areas were. There was a bit of flexibility on the mark scheme, but essentially that should be the subduction zone. These should be fold mountains, but you may have got away with some other answers because the mark scheme was reasonably generous there. Describe one way a region affected by earthquakes can prepare for this hazard. The key here is one. You can only say one, and you need to develop your answers. So earthquake-proof buildings, which may be fitted with shock absorbers. So earthquake-proof buildings, that's the first bit, gets you your first mark. But for your second mark, you've got to develop it and say how it is earthquake-proof. So it's point and development. But key thing here, people are making a mistake, it's got to be one. Moving over to the next page, and the next question. So it says here, using an example or examples, describe the effects of earthquake on people and property. So key thing here, you've got to include examples. If you didn't get full marks, it's probably because you've not got an example. It's got to be accurate as well. You can't use an example that's incorrect. I read a few and they'd given examples and they just weren't appropriate, so that doesn't work. So try and think of a couple of things that would affect people and a couple of things that were properties. Obviously death, getting trapped, thinking about the loss of buildings then being damaged, but then thinking about some of the secondary effects like the impact of people not having their shops, so loss of income, things like that. Okay, so again for that really you need point development. Moving over to the next question. This was tricky, I must admit. It was a nasty question and I think they've put it in on purpose really. They ask you which is the thickest layer of the Earth's cross section. Now obviously everybody kind of thinks it's the mantle, but if we look here, it's the core. Okay, you've got to look at what's on the diagram. It does say that you need to study figure 1a, which is up here. So the answer is core. It is bigger than the mantle sections. Really important. And the density, well, you need to know that the inner core is the densest or the core is the densest. You've got to weigh both of those. Okay. Question here, looking at the different earthquakes. I love a question like this. What makes it one earthquake worse than another? Here, another key word, one. You've got to have point and development. Okay, so you might say the magnitude, because if it was 7, it's not going to be as bad as 9. Or you might say population density. If there are more people living in an area, that will mean there's more people that could be killed. Something like that. Point and development. Next question. For either an earthquake or a volcano, you studied, describe the immediate responses. Responses are what happens after the event and what people do really. So handing out aid, putting up emergency shelters. Some people used Iceland for this one, and the nuclear eruption which caused the ash cloud. Not sure that's the best one really, because the response really there was just to ground the airplanes. But lots of people said about emergency shelters, rescuing trapped people. That wasn't really something that happened with that particular eruption. It didn't really hurt anybody. Most people got out of the way. So you can't say they pulled out dead bodies from underneath the collapsed buildings in Iceland if that didn't actually happen. So do watch that. Again, range of points or point and then development. Okay, got to have the case study for full marks, and a list won't get you full marks. It's got to be written out in sentences to get the full marks. Final question here. 2 reasons why the Boxing Day had such severe effect. Number 1, really obvious. It was 9 on the Richter scale. Number 2, there was a tsunami. Really simple there. There were other acceptable answers, but that was the simple set of answers. And then moving on here, describe one way in which a region affected by a volcanic eruptions can prepare. So, despite me making this a really important point while you're doing your assessment and saying make sure you don't confuse volcanoes and earthquakes, a number of people talking about how you can prepare for earthquakes, it's not going to count. Again, 1, meaning you've got to have for 2 marks, point and development. So, emergency service were trained, therefore they could reach the people in time, that sort of thing, point and development. Finally, explain how volcanoes formed either constructive or destructive. Mistakes that were made here were people that are talking about conservative, not correct. People that talked about destructive and then drew a conservative boundary. The key thing here is make sure you get it right. So if we're talking about, not in this example, a constructive, we say that convection currents in the mantle move the plates apart. Got to make sure that your arrows on here are in the right direction. Lots of people making a mistake. This allows magma from the mantle to rise up and form shield volcanoes and new crust. Something like that. You might want to give an example too. Probably easier to do a destructive plate boundary. Nice 2 diagrams here because there's more to say. So in this one, Oceanic crust subducts, geographical word, under the continental plate. Earthquakes cause crack in the continental. The melted plate rises up through these cracks to form steep-sided composite volcanoes, something like that. Again, talking about convection currents, lots of people focusing on how convection currents, or saying convection currents cause earthquakes. They don't. They cause the movement of the plates, which cause earthquakes, or they cause the movement of the plate, which causes volcanoes. So, key thing really to have a look at is think about, and the main problems occurred where people didn't read the question carefully, so they wrote about the wrong thing, or they only got 1 point when they should have got 2 points because they didn't develop their answer, or they didn't really develop these longer answers with enough detail or examples.